What if I told you that the very idea of sleeping alone in a separate room would seem not only strange to a medieval person, but dangerous? Today, a private bed seems like something we take for granted, almost an element of comfort and privacy. But just a few centuries ago, sleeping alone was a luxury that almost no one could afford. And it wasn't because of overcrowding or poverty, but because of the harsh reality. The cold came every night and spared no one. The world at that time did not know central heating, sealed windows, or warm synthetic blankets. Houses cooled down in a matter of hours, and the interior walls froze just as much as the exterior ones. To survive, people had to use the most accessible source of heat, their own bodies. That is why beds were made narrow, rooms were small, and sleeping arrangements were communal. The more people slept together, the higher their chances of surviving the night without frostbite and serious illness. Watch this video to the end, and you'll learn why narrow beds 1 meter wide were considered ideal, how entire families were housed in one room without chaos, and how the simple physics of sleeping together saved people from the nighttime cold. Long before humanity invented comfort. Here's a hidden truth that everyone glosses over when talking about medieval castles. Luxurious private bedrooms as we understand them simply did not exist. Our modern consciousness is firmly tied to the idea of privacy, personal space, and a separate room for sleeping. We see kings and queens in separate chambers in movies, but this is largely an anachronism or a privilege reserved for only the highest percentage of the nobility in the late period. For a peasant, townsman, or even a minor feudal lord, the concept of my room was completely foreign. People lived, worked, ate, and slept in full view of everyone else, and this was considered perfectly normal. Coexistence was not a choice, but the only available model of life. Privacy in the Middle Ages was often associated with isolation, and isolation was dangerous. Being alone meant being vulnerable, both in terms of physical safety and social status. Sleep was a public, not a private, affair, just like eating or working. People fell asleep listening to the breathing and conversations of others and woke up together. This formed a completely different type of collective consciousness, where the boundaries of the personal were blurred. A bed was not just a piece of furniture, but one of the most expensive items in the house, a status symbol. In the wills of wealthy townspeople, beds were often bequeathed as separate and very valuable items of property, on a par with real estate. Therefore, owning a large, sturdy, carved wooden bed was already a luxury. The idea of having several such items so that everyone could sleep separately was economically absurd for the vast majority of the population. One bed had to serve as many people as possible. The very structure of a medieval house did not allow for privacy. Peasant huts and urban craftsmen's houses often had only 1 or 2 rooms. In castles and wealthy estates, rooms were en suite, i.e., walk-through. To get into one room, you had to walk through another, which made any privacy impossible. The concept of a corridor in the modern sense did not exist. It appeared much later. People saw nothing wrong with sleeping in the same room. The owners of the house, their relatives, servants, and even casual guests often spent the night in the same hall. This was dictated not only by the need to save space, but also by considerations of safety and warmth. At night, the house was vulnerable, and staying together provided a sense of security. In addition, it was easier to keep warm from a common hearth. The division of the house into functional areas, bedroom, living room, kitchen, began very slowly and initially affected only the wealthiest segments of society. For the average person, the entire house was a single living space. The concept of a bedroom as a room intended exclusively for 1 or 2 people to sleep in only began to take shape in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Before that, sleep was a public act. This social nature of sleep was also reflected in everyday habits. People did not change into special pajamas in a secluded room. They often slept either in the same clothes they wore during the day or in long undergarments. The process of going to sleep was not an intimate ritual. It was simply the end of the day, which took place in front of all the other members of the household. Even among the nobility, privacy was relative. A lord and lady might have their own bed, often with a canopy, but their personal servants might sleep at their feet in the same room. This was considered normal as it ensured that any orders from the master could be carried out immediately, even in the middle of the night. Servants were not so much outsiders as part of the feudal lord's extended family. Psychologically, medieval people were oriented toward the collective rather than the individual. The idea of being alone in a dark room all night could cause anxiety and fear rather than a feeling of comfort. The shared breathing, the warmth of bodies, the feeling of other people's presence nearby, all this created a psychological comfort that is difficult for us, modern people, to understand. This fundamental difference in the perception of space is the key to understanding why sleeping together was not just the norm, but a necessity. Social and economic reasons were closely intertwined with the main threat: the cold. They did not seek solitude because solitude meant freezing alone. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about the modern obsession with privacy compared to medieval communality? Write about it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Are you ready to learn the truth about what life was really like in famous medieval castles, away from the formal receptions? The central element of most medieval dwellings, from peasant huts to lords' castles, was the Great Hall. It was a huge multifunctional room that served as a living room, dining room, workplace, and, most importantly, a shared bedroom. This is where the main hearth burned, often the only permanent source of heat in the entire building. The entire life of the family and household revolved around this fire. During the day, the hall was the center of activity. Here, the master received visitors, conducted business, craftsmen could do their work, and women spun or wove. In the evening, tables were set here for dinner. After the meal, the tables, which were often simple boards on trestles, were cleared away to make room for sleeping. This was a daily transformation of the living space. At night, this hall was transformed into a large camp. Servants and family members who did not have separate beds spread their mattresses and straw mattresses directly on the floor. The warmest and safest places, of course, were closest to the fire. There was a strict, albeit unspoken hierarchy of who slept where. Honored guests could sleep closer to the hosts, while the lower servants huddled against the walls where the drafts were strongest. The floors in such halls were rarely clean. They were covered with a layer of straw or reeds to insulate the stone or earthen floors. This layer was not changed often, and food scraps and other debris accumulated in it. Sleeping on such a floor was uncomfortable and cold, so anyone who could afford even a simple straw mattress was considered lucky. In peasant houses, the situation was even simpler. Often, the entire house consisted of a single room, which was shared by all family members. There was no question of dividing the space. Everyone slept huddled together on benches, chests, or on a common straw mattress by the hearth. This was the only way to accumulate heat and survive the frosty night. In castles and large estates, the lord and his family could have a separate room, known as the sunroom or bedchamber. But even this room was often a walk-through and served as a bedroom for the entire family. It contained the main bed, but other sleeping places could be located nearby. Privacy remained very limited. The size of the hall itself played a cruel joke on its inhabitants. The high ceilings necessary for the smoke from the hearth to accumulate at the top meant that all the heat immediately rose to the rafters. Down below at the level of the sleeping people, the air remained cold. Even next to the fire, you could feel the icy cold of the stone walls on your back. The windows in such halls were large to let in as much light as possible, but before affordable glass became available, they were either not glazed at all or covered with oiled cloth, parchment, or wooden shutters. Neither of these provided protection from drafts. The wind blew through the hall, forcing people to wrap themselves in cloaks and blankets and huddle as close to each other as possible. Lighting was minimal. A few torches or tallow candles barely dispelled the darkness in the huge room. Most of the hall was plunged into darkness, which made sleep restless. People slept in semi-darkness, listening to every rustle, which only intensified their desire to be closer to others. Thus, the Great Hall was the beating heart of the house, where people gathered not out of love for society, but out of dire necessity. Everyone sought the warmth that only the central hearth could provide. What was it like to maintain this sole source of life? But what if I told you that this life-saving fire was incredibly inefficient and created a lot of problems in itself? We'll talk about that in the next chapter. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of medieval comfort. The famous blazing hearth was a terrible source of heat. We are accustomed to romanticizing the image of a large fireplace, but in the early Middle Ages, it was simply an open hearth in the center of the hall. The smoke escaped through a hole in the roof, and with it went the lion's share of the heat. The efficiency of such a hearth was negligible. Most of the fire's energy flew up into the sky, while the people in the hall froze. The main problem with this type of stove was the constant need for fuel. Keeping the fire going was hard work, requiring round-the-clock attention. It took a huge amount of wood, which had to be gathered, dried, chopped, and constantly thrown onto the flames. In winter, wood consumption became enormous, and a shortage of wood was tantamount to disaster. The right to collect fallen trees in the forest was an important privilege, and stealing wood was considered a serious offense. The fire itself created areas of sharp temperature contrast. It was unbearably hot near the flames, and it was possible to get burned. But as soon as you took a few steps away, you were enveloped in icy cold. People sitting around the fire were literally roasting on one side and freezing on the other. This created constant discomfort and forced people to constantly move around and crowd together. Smoke was another serious problem. The hole in the roof could not cope with all the smoke, especially in windy or rainy weather. Acrid smoke filled the room, accumulated under the ceiling, and slowly descended. It stung the eyes, caused coughing, and covered all surfaces with a layer of soot. The walls and ceilings in medieval halls were black with soot. The advent of the wall-mounted fireplace with a chimney, which became widespread in the late Middle Ages, was a real revolution. It removed smoke from the room, making the air cleaner. However, it was even less effective in terms of heating. Almost all the heat escaped up the chimney, and the fireplace itself created a powerful draft, drawing icy air into the room through all the cracks in the walls and windows. A social drama unfolded around the fire. The place by the hearth was the most privileged. It was occupied by the head of the family, honored guests, or senior members of the household. The rest were seated in order of seniority and status. Sitting by the fire was not just comfortable, it was a sign of respect and authority.
Indeed. A comforting thought in these...
Maintaining the fire required constant attention. It could not be left unattended, especially at night, due to the risk of fire. Wooden structures, straw on the floor, fabric curtains, everything could burst into flames from a single spark. Someone had to be on duty to watch the fire and throw wood on it, which made nighttime sleep intermittent for some of the household members. For those who slept huddled together on the floor in the large hall, the fire was both a friend and an enemy. It provided some warmth, but its light made it difficult to sleep, and the smoke made it difficult to breathe. In addition, sparks flying out of the hearth posed a constant threat to straw mattresses and fur blankets. People slept in a state of constant, albeit subconscious, anxiety. The fuel varied. In wooded areas, firewood was used. In treeless areas, such as some parts of England or Scotland, peat was used. Peat produced a lot of smoke and a specific smell, but it burned long and evenly. The use of coal was rare. Its extraction was not developed, and it was considered an unhealthy fuel because of its strong fumes. The hearth was not only a source of heat, but also the center of domestic life. Food was cooked on it, clothes were dried by it, and work was done by its light. Its importance was absolute. An extinguished hearth in a frosty winter meant not just cold, it meant a halt to life, cold food, and the inability to dry thoroughly wet clothes. Therefore, the tyranny of fire was absolute, and the whole life of the family revolved around it. If you found this unexpected truth about medieval comfort interesting, please like this video, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos about the harsh realities of survival in the Middle Ages. What if I told you that medieval houses, including castles, were built in such a way that it was almost impossible to keep them warm? We look at the thick stone walls of castles and think of them as reliable protection. But stone is a very poor insulator. It quickly freezes through and then radiates cold into the room, even if there is a fire burning inside. In winter, stone walls literally oozed cold. Peasant houses were no better. The most common types were mud huts made of clay and straw on a wooden frame, half-timbered, or simple log cabins. Although wood and clay retain heat better than stone, these structures had countless gaps. The walls were drafty. They had to be constantly caulked with moss, tow, or simply plastered with fresh clay. Windows were the main problem. Glass was incredibly expensive until the end of the Middle Ages. Only very wealthy people could afford it, and then usually only for churches or ceremonial halls. Ordinary windows were covered with wooden shutters, which plunged the room into darkness but at least blocked the wind. Alternatively, thinner materials that let light through were used. Such materials included oiled cloth, thinly scraped horn plates, or ox bladders. These materials allowed dim light to pass through but provided no protection from the cold. They were not airtight and tore easily. Such windows were constantly drafty, and the temperature in the room was hardly higher than outside. Roofs were also a source of constant heat loss. They were covered with straw, shingles, or reeds. These materials provided good protection from rain if laid correctly, but they did not retain heat very well. As we already know, not only smoke, but also all the warm air, which was so valuable, escaped through the hole in the roof or the primitive chimney. The floor was another source of cold. In simple houses, it was just earth, packed down. In wealthier homes or castles, it was made of stone. Both options were freezing cold. To insulate themselves from the cold coming from below, the floors were covered with a thick layer of straw or dry grass. This helped but created other problems. The layout of the houses itself did not contribute to heat retention. The absence of corridors, walk-through rooms, and huge undivided halls all created ideal conditions for drafts. Cold air flowed freely throughout the house, encountering no barriers. Any attempt to warm one place was immediately negated by the overall volume of cold air. To combat this, people used textiles. The walls in wealthy homes were hung with heavy tapestries or simply thick fabrics. This was not so much decoration as insulation. The fabric created an air gap between the cold stone wall and the room, which slightly reduced heat loss and blocked drafts. Doors were also a problem. They were made of solid planks but rarely fit tightly against the doorframe. There were always large gaps around the doors. To block the cold air, thick fabric bolsters were placed at the thresholds, and the doorways themselves were often hung with heavy curtains. This created a kind of vestibule. All medieval architecture was primarily focused on defense, in the case of castles, or simplicity of construction, in the case of peasant houses. Energy efficiency was not a priority, and the very concept did not exist. People instinctively understood that their homes were drafty, but they had no technological solutions to this problem. Therefore, they had to survive not by using technology, but by relying on each other. What was it like to sleep in such icy boxes? In the next chapter, we will talk about the main refuge from the cold inside the house, the bed itself. In an icy and drafty room, the bed itself became the only bastion of warmth. The medieval bed, at least for those who could afford it, was not just a piece of furniture, but an entire architectural structure, a room within a room. Its design was entirely subordinated to one purpose: to preserve the precious warmth of human bodies. The basis of such a bed was a massive wooden frame. It was often very high in order to raise the sleepers as far as possible from the cold floor. There could be empty space under the bed, which was sometimes used for storage, or servants could sleep there on the floor. The main thing was that the mattress was at a considerable height. The most important element was the canopy, a fabric cover over the bed. It could be attached to the ceiling or be part of the bed structure itself, supported by 4 carved pillars. The canopy served 2 purposes. First, it protected sleepers from dust, soot, and debris that could fall from the ceiling. Second, it created a roof, preventing warm air from breathing from immediately escaping upward. Heavy, thick curtains were hung around the bed on all 4 sides. Most often, they were made of wool or other thick material. At night, these curtains were drawn tightly. The result was a small enclosed space, almost like a tent. The volume of air inside was small, and it quickly warmed up from the breath of several sleeping people. It was an ingenious microclimate system. The temperature inside such a bed tent could be several degrees higher than in the rest of the room. This was enough to make sleep possible in a room where the temperature dropped to almost zero. The thick fabric of the curtains also provided excellent protection from the drafts that blew through the room. The mattresses, or feather beds, were a luxury item. They were stuffed with down or feathers, which made them not only soft but also very warm. The feather bed acted as an excellent insulator, preventing the cold from coming up from below. Those who were poorer used mattresses stuffed with straw, wool, or even dry leaves. Straw quickly became matted and had to be changed frequently, but it also provided some insulation from the cold floorboards. Bed linen, if available, also played a role. Sheets were made of linen or coarse hemp. They were not so much for warmth as for hygiene. The main source of warmth was blankets and bedspreads. They were made of heavy wool or fur. Often people slept covered not with blankets, but with their own outer clothing, cloaks and capes made of thick, felted cloth. The bed was so valuable that it was often placed in the main hall. It was visible to everyone, demonstrating the wealth of the owners. In later periods, when separate master bedrooms appeared, the bed still remained the center of the room. It was massive, richly decorated with carvings and expensive fabrics. Of course, there were no such beds in peasant houses. There, people slept on wide wooden benches attached to the wall or on the so-called floor, a wooden platform near the stove. But the principle of heat conservation remained the same. People wrapped themselves in clothes, covered themselves with everything they had, and lay as close to each other as possible. Thus, a bed with a canopy was not a whim, but a vital survival technology. It was the response of small-scale architecture to the shortcomings of large-scale architecture. The house was cold, so people built themselves a small warm house right inside it. This enclosed space made it possible for several people to sleep together. What if I told you that the medieval beds we see in museums seem so narrow to us not because people were smaller? What I am about to show you is banned in 12 countries. It's a joke, of course, but the truth is that these beds were designed for several people to sleep in at once, and they didn't sleep the way we do. The standard width of a bed often did not exceed 1.5 meters, which by our standards is not enough even for 2 people. However, 3, 4, or more people could sleep in it. The secret was that people often slept in a semi-sitting position. They placed large pillows or special bolsters under their backs. This was done for several reasons. First, it was believed that sleeping lying down was bad for digestion. Second, it was easier to breathe in a smoky room if your head was higher. And third, in this position, people took up less space widthwise, and more of them could fit in the bed. Sleeping was a collective activity. The head of the family could sleep in the center. Next to him was his spouse, and on either side were the younger members of the family. Servants could sleep in the same bed, at the feet of their masters, across or on a special add-on bench. This was called a trundle bed, a low bed on wheels that was pushed under the master's high bed during the day and pulled out at night. The main reason for such close sleeping arrangements was warmth. It's simple and effective physics. Every human body is a heat generator. When several bodies are in close proximity, they create a common warm zone. Heat loss through the skin is drastically reduced. In the enclosed space of a bed with a canopy, this effect was multiplied many times over. People lay down in bed, huddling close together. It was the most accessible and completely free way to keep warm. No fire could provide such constant and even heat as the warmth of another person. In harsh winters, it was not a matter of comfort, but a matter of survival. Falling asleep alone in a freezing room meant the risk of simply not waking up in the morning. Sleeping together was not limited to family members. In medieval inns and hostels, it was absolutely normal to sleep in the same bed with complete strangers. Travelers paid not for a room, but for a place in a bed. The owner could put 1 or 2 other guests in with you, and this was not considered out of the ordinary. This practice led to the formation of a certain etiquette. There were rules on how to behave in a shared bed so as not to disturb others. You couldn't toss and turn too much, push or take up more space than you were entitled to. Sleeping together taught people tolerance and the ability to get along with others in the most confined spaces. Servants and apprentices often shared a single bed or simply a large mattress in the attic or utility room. They slept huddled together like sardines in a barrel, using each other as warmers. This was a standard part of their daily life and did not cause any complaints. The alternative, sleeping alone on the cold floor, was much worse. Even in wealthy homes where there might be several beds, they tried to put them all in one room. The idea of distributing family members to different rooms so that each would sleep alone in the cold did not occur to anyone. It made much more sense to gather everyone in one bedroom, where the fire could be kept burning in the fireplace and where people could keep each other warm. This tradition of sleeping together was incredibly persistent. It persisted for centuries and only began to disappear with the advent of more efficient heating methods and, more importantly, with the change in the very concept of personality and privacy. But for medieval people, cramped beds were synonymous with warmth, safety, and life. Was it comfortable by our standards? Of course not. And what other dangers, besides the cold, awaited those who slept in a medieval house? In the next chapter, we will talk about nighttime rituals and hidden threats. Going to sleep in the Middle Ages was not as simple a ritual as it is for us. It involved a series of procedures aimed at safety and warmth. The main task was to prepare the house for a long, dark, and cold night. All the household members took part in this before gathering in the common room or bedroom. The first thing to do was to take care of the fire. The hearth or fireplace could not be left burning at full power due to the risk of fire, but it was also impossible to extinguish it completely. Rekindling the fire in the morning was a difficult task. Therefore, the fire was carefully preserved. The coals were covered with a thick layer of ash so that they would smolder until morning, retaining their heat. The second task was to protect against drafts. It was a whole ritual. All the shutters on the windows were closed, often additionally plugged with rags. Heavy curtains on the doors and windows were drawn tightly. Special fabric bolsters filled with sand or wool were placed against the door thresholds to block the icy air blowing under the door. Light was a great value. With the onset of darkness, the house was plunged into almost complete darkness. They used torches, tallow candles, or expensive wax candles in wealthy homes. Before going to bed, all sources of open fire, except for the preserved hearth, were carefully extinguished. This was also a fire safety measure. People went to bed very early at sunset to save fuel and candles. The danger of fire was the main threat of the medieval night. Houses were built of wood, floors were covered with straw, and beds were draped with cloth. Any spark from the hearth or an overturned candle could lead to disaster. Sleeping in a common room was also a measure of collective safety. If one person noticed smoke, they could wake the others. The darkness was absolute. There was no street lighting outside the house, and moonlight rarely penetrated the clouds or small windows. This impenetrable darkness created psychological pressure. People feared the darkness, which, according to their beliefs, was full of dangers, both real and supernatural. Sleeping in a group gave a sense of security from nighttime fears. Before going to bed, people prepared their sleeping places. Those who slept on the floor spread out their mattresses. Those who slept in beds made their beds. Often, special hot water bottles were taken to bed. These could be hot stones wrapped in cloth or special metal vessels filled with hot coals from the hearth. They were placed in bed some time before bedtime to warm the mattresses and blankets. Hygiene procedures before bedtime were minimal. People could wash their hands and face in a basin of cold water, but there was no question of a full shower or bath. Washing was a rare event. This meant that people went to bed in a shared bed, retaining all the smells and dirt accumulated during the day. Nighttime trips to the toilet were also a problem. Castles might have had wardrobes, toilets and wall niches, but in ordinary houses, the facilities were in the yard. Going outside at night in the dark and cold was risky. Therefore, chamber pots were kept in the room, which everyone used, often without leaving the bed curtains. People slept very lightly. Sleep was interrupted by the cold, smoke, the need to watch the fire, or simply because a bedmate was jostling. The idea of 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep was probably not the norm. Some historians believe that split sleep was common in the Middle Ages. People slept for a few hours, then woke up in the middle of the night, stayed awake for an hour or two, and then fell asleep again until morning. Thus, night was not a time of rest, but a time of vigilance and struggle for survival. Cold, darkness, and the risk of fire were constant companions. People survived only by joining forces, sharing the warmth of their bodies and collectively protecting their sleep. The idea of special sleepwear, such as pajamas, is a very recent invention. In the Middle Ages, people approached this issue in a much more practical way. The main purpose of nightwear was not comfort, but warmth. Therefore, often the best clothes for sleeping were the same clothes that were worn during the day. For peasants or ordinary townspeople, it was normal to sleep in their daytime clothes, perhaps removing only the outer layer and shoes. A long linen or woolen shirt and trousers remained on the body. This was logical. Clothes saturated with body heat during the day served as an additional layer of insulation at night. In addition, there was no need to spend time changing clothes in a cold room in the morning. Those who could afford separate nightwear wore long nightshirts. They were made of linen or cotton for the wealthy and were very wide and long, often reaching the feet. This shirt was, in fact, a universal undergarment that was worn both day and night. At night, it absorbed sweat and separated the body from prickly woolen blankets. The most important element of nightwear was headwear. People almost never slept with their heads uncovered. Both men and women wore nightcaps. This was dictated not by fashion, but by common sense. A huge amount of heat escapes through the head, and a warm cap made of wool or thick fabric helped to retain it. These caps came in various shapes, from simple bags to intricate designs with tassels. They fit snugly around the head and often covered the ears. In addition to providing warmth, the cap also served a hygienic function. It protected pillows from dirt and grease from the hair and prevented the hair from tangling. Additional clothing could be worn over the nightshirt. In wealthy homes, this could be a special robe or dressing gown, often lined with fur. People not only slept in it, but also spent time in it before bed or immediately after waking up. In poor homes, it was any available clothing, an old cloak, tunic, or vest. Layers were the key to everything. One thick layer of clothing keeps you warmer than several thin ones. The air pockets between the layers of fabric serve as an excellent insulator. Medieval people understood this intuitively. A nightshirt, a daytime tunic over it, and all this under a heavy woolen blanket and a fur coverlet. They also tried to keep their feet warm. Although they took off their shoes, many continued to sleep in stockings or socks. The woolen stockings they wore during the day were also perfect for nighttime. Sleeping barefoot in an icy bed, even if it had been warmed up with a hot water bottle, was uncomfortable. In monasteries where monks often slept in shared dormitories, the rules were strict. Monks often slept fully clothed in their robes so that they would be ready to get up for night prayers at any moment. This was also dictated by asceticism and the rejection of physical comfort, but in practice it was an excellent way to combat the cold in unheated monastery buildings. Contrary to some myths, there was no question of nudity during sleep. It was impractical, cold, and considered indecent, given that there were almost always other people in the bed or room. Clothing was a barrier, both physical and social. Thus, the nighttime wardrobe of a medieval person was a direct continuation of their daytime wardrobe. It was multi-layered, functional, and served a single purpose: to keep the body from getting cold. A nightcap, shirt, and stockings were as important a part of the survival system as a bed with a canopy. The practice of sleeping together was not limited to blood relatives. The medieval household, or family, was a much broader concept than ours. It included not only the husband, wife, and their relatives, but also servants, apprentices, workers, and anyone else who lived and worked under the same roof, and they often slept together. Servants in wealthy homes rarely had their own separate rooms. Their sleeping quarters were determined by their duties. Personal servants, as we have already mentioned, slept in their master's bedroom at the foot of their bed. They had to be within earshot to respond to the first call. This was a sign of their status and closeness to their master. Lower-ranking servants, cooks, grooms, laundresses, slept where they worked. Kitchen servants could sleep on benches or mattresses right in the kitchen, using the heat from the cooling hearth. Grooms slept in the hayloft above the stables. Not only was it warm, but it also allowed them to keep an eye on their master's valuable horses. Apprentices and students who lived in the home of a master craftsman were also part of his family. They ate at the same table with their master and slept together in one room or in the attic. Often they had one large shared bed or simply a straw mattress where everyone lay in a row. This was part of their training and upbringing. Hospitality was an important social obligation in the Middle Ages. There were many travelers, merchants, pilgrims, messengers. If a traveler stayed in a house, he was given shelter. But this rarely meant a separate room. The guest could be put up in the main hall with everyone else, or as a sign of special respect, the host could offer him a place in his own bed. Sharing a bed with a guest, even a stranger, was a sign of trust and honor. It put the guest on the same level as family members. Of course, this applied to guests of equal or higher social status. No one would put a vagrant in the master's bed, but they would not turn him out into the cold either, offering him a place on the floor by the fire. In inns and taverns, the practice of sleeping together was taken to the extreme. The rooms were shared and contained several large beds. The innkeeper did not sell rooms, but rather places in beds. You could pay the full price and buy out the entire bed. But more often than not, people paid for one place and shared the bed with 2, 3, or even 5 strangers. This was the absolute norm at the time. Travelers went to bed fully clothed, often placing their wallets and valuables under their heads. There were certain unspoken rules of conduct in such a bed, but in general it was a lottery. You could get a quiet neighbor, or you could get a restless or loud snorer. This practice began to disappear only in modern times, with the rise of individualism and ideas about hygiene. People began to value personal space and disdain physical contact with strangers. But in the Middle Ages, economy and warmth were much more important than squeamishness. Thus, the medieval bed was a veritable social melting pot. It mixed statuses, family ties, and chance acquaintances. It was a microcosm reflecting the collective nature of medieval society, where no one could or wanted to exist alone, even at night. The practice of sleeping together, which had dominated for centuries, began to recede very slowly. The conditions that made sleeping together a necessity gradually disappeared and were replaced by new ideas and new technologies. One of the main technological factors was the improvement of heating. The spread of fireplaces with chimneys and then the appearance of the first stoves made homes warmer. Architecture also changed. Corridors began to appear in the homes of wealthy people. This was a fundamental innovation. The corridors separated rooms from each other, making them impassable. For the first time in history, a room could become a closed, private space. The glass industry developed, and glass became cheaper. By the 16th and 17th centuries, glazed windows began to appear not only in castles, but also in the homes of wealthy townspeople. At the same time, society itself was changing. The Renaissance brought with it a new concept: the value of the individual, of personality. People began to think of themselves more as separate individuals and not just as part of a collective. Ideas about hygiene and propriety also changed. As medicine developed and squeamishness grew, the idea of sleeping in the same bed with strangers or even servants became less and less appealing. People began to value bodily cleanliness more and avoid overly close contact. Beds with canopies and curtains, once a necessity, became a symbol of status and luxury. But their function changed. Now they serve not so much to keep warm as to create an intimate, secluded space within the room, to protect from light and prying eyes. The bed ceased to be the social center of the home and became a personal, intimate space. Sleep itself changed. From a public act, it became a private ritual. What would have been strange and frightening for a medieval person, sleeping alone in a dark room, has become the norm for us and synonymous with comfort. Today, as we lie down in our warm, comfortable beds, we rarely think about how long the evolution of this simple object has been. We take the privacy of sleep for granted, but history shows that it is one of the greatest luxuries that civilization has given us, freeing us from the need to share our body heat just to survive until morning. We can see that sleeping together in the Middle Ages was not a whim or a sign of a lack of culture. It was a complex, multi-layered survival strategy dictated by the harsh realities of the time. Cold architecture, inefficient heating, economic necessity, and the collective consciousness of the people all made sleeping in cramped quarters the only possible option. People used each other's warmth as the most reliable and accessible resource. A bed with a canopy was their fortress, a small, warm oasis in an icy and drafty house. And although such a lifestyle seems uncomfortable and devoid of basic amenities to us, for them it was the norm, a guarantee of the survival of the family and the household. What other aspects of medieval life would you like us to explore? Perhaps you are interested in how they stored food without refrigerators, or the peculiarities of their daily hygiene? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the past.